He's also known for jumping, spinning, singing, and playing a huge array of instruments on stage with his band, the Kubasonics. He started the Kubasonics here in Edmonton, and then immigrated. He went east. A lot of Ukrainians came this way. He went east to the Maritimes with the majority of the members of the band, I think at the time, Maria and well, now, sort of.
Only the ones who had no choice.
Yes, his family members. And then continued recreating traditional Ukrainian folk melodies with a twist. And he's here now today to share with us his immigration experience and what he has learned about serving cod and pierogies on the same platter. Join me in welcoming Brian Cherwick.
Thank you very much. I just want to preface this with a disclaimer. This will be a decidedly non-academic kind of presentation. Sometimes I say I'm a lapsed academic, like I do less of that. But when Larissa first invited me to come here, she kind of gave a couple of topics that she thought would be of interest to people. One of them was this question: how has the playlists of Ukrainian music in Canada changed over the time that people have started arriving, more people arriving from Ukraine in recent years? That's something that requires sort of more in-depth kind of research of the type that I'm not really doing right now. But what I did notice, and it's what I'm going to talk about today, there are certain trends that have carried on for a very long time, and so we'll discuss those. And then the second thing she asked me to discuss is basically my own kind of personal development, how I kind of came up with the music that I play, and how it's changed now that I'm in a completely different environment. So hence you see these two pictures, me on a bale of hay many years ago in Alberta, and me getting my feet very wet in the Atlantic Ocean. You can see the fellow with the bushy hair next to me. He's a resident Newfoundlander. He lives like probably 100 meters from the ocean, and he was the most terrified of everybody to take that picture. So some of the information I'm going to share with you as well. Wasn't sure who was going to show up here today. I most often, as you can imagine from where I live, speak to audiences of non-Ukrainians or people who have very little idea about the fact that Ukrainians have been in Canada for so long. And so I usually have to, unfortunately, before last year, had to describe to people where on the map Ukraine was. With the terrible circumstances that we face today, everybody's well aware of where that is. But what I usually have to tell people is the majority of the Ukrainians that came in Canada until the 1990s, when Ukraine became independent, came from those four kind of western provinces in the southwest corner of Ukraine. And those western provinces consist of a whole bunch of different kind of ethnographic regions, and those ethnographic regions made up the culture that those people brought with them when they arrived to Canada those hundreds of years ago. I have to tell people in Newfoundland this whole idea that the Canadian government was kind of agitating for people to come here, encouraging them to come and settle here, showing different ways how they arrived. And then, people, these are these stereotypical pictures that we're all familiar with, but that they've never seen back out east. And people came with their own particular baggage, and some of that baggage was musical baggage. And so one of the things, I guess, to start this off, I always like to kind of describe the type of music that people played before they left Ukraine. So, and I mostly talk about instrumental music, the kind of stuff that people would have played for dances and weddings and things like that. I'm not talking about choral music or liturgical music or art music, classical music. There's all those kinds of things as well. So primarily what we had was ensembles that had these instruments, like you can see in the middle of the person playing the violin, which was like the main instrument for almost any kind of dance music. Next to him is the guy with the giant cymbale. That's the instrument that I kind of play most often. And next to on the other side of the violin is this guy with the drum. In the old days, the people on the farms told me, if you have a violin and a cymbale, that's a whole band. And if you have a whole violin, a cymbale, and a drum, that's a whole orchestra. Okay. So some of the other, here's another violin, cymbal, and drum group from Ukraine. Here's, sometimes you had two violins, so one violin plays the tune and the other one kind of plays accompaniment patterns. Sometimes you had an instrument called the basolya. It kind of looks like a big cello, and they would play like a bass kind of part on that. And already these are musicians from here in Alberta. So these are your violin and cymbala already. Here's a picture. There's lots of pictures of old weddings. You can see the guys sitting on the ground there, two violinists and a guy holding a big drum. Here's some guys, two violins and a cymbal and another drum. And then here's an even more expanded group. They got somebody playing a supilka on the side there, a whistle, and someone playing the trumpet already. So this was John Zalisko's orchestra. I don't know if any of you remember that name from, he was like one of the superstars in East Central Alberta in the 1950s and the early 1960s. And lots of times people would, if they were having a wedding, they would just build one of these floors for people to dance on, and then later on use that lumber to build a chicken coop or a barn or something like that out of that. So when I'm looking at most of what's going on in Ukrainian Canadian music, if we want to say that, I kind of identified there's a few significant nodes or places where the kind of music that we played changed. So up until the 1920s, people just played whatever they knew from their own village, and any groups of people would just, what they remembered, that's kind of what they played. There were no kind of standard Ukrainian music for everybody. It was all based on those ethnographic regions that I had mentioned before. But we had some kind of nodes where these changed. In the 1920s, we had one significant change. I'd say in the 1960s, another pretty significant change. And then in the 1980s, a third thing that kind of dragged on almost till today. And so we'll see how that all works out. So in the 1920s, the first kind of major figure that kind of precipitated some change is this violinist. His name is Pavlo Homonyuk. And he was from near Ternopil in Ukraine. Pidvolochesky, I think, is where he was from. And he settled in New York City. And he was living there just at the time when all these record companies, you can see Columbia Records is printing this advertisement about him. Companies made these record machines that you could play records on, and then they made records so that you would buy them to use their machine. And they kind of sold all kind of records that were mostly like jazz music, classical music, Dixieland music, all these kinds of things. When some country music, when they got past all of that, they started looking for new markets to sell their records to. So they started targeting different kind of ethnographic communities. So they targeted African Americans and started making music, decidedly for them. And then started looking at all these European groups, and Ukrainians were a significant group in the eastern part of the United States. And this famous kind of story where a record company executive walked into this shop in New York and was asking, are there any musicians that we could record? And the shop owner said, how about that guy that's over there? Homonyuk just happened to be in the store at the time. So they recorded. He ended up becoming. He made different kind of records with different kind of groups. So he would just gather together whatever musicians he could for whatever recording session that he had. Here's one where he has a larger size orchestra. And what he ended up recording were three kinds of music. One of them were old traditional dance tunes that he remembered from Ukraine. So we'll give you just a little bit of taste. All of these, I could play you music for hours and hours. We don't have too much time, so we'll hear a little bit of what it sounds like if we can. Whoops, let's go back. Hello, how come you're not playing? There we go. So you can hear the fiddle, there's cymbala in there, and there's somebody playing one of those bass instruments like we heard or saw in that photograph. Okay, we'll stop him there right away. Whoops, I'll just take you back for a second. I like the name of this song. It's Hray Abo Hroshi Vidai, play or else give us our money back. I don't know how many thousand times I was playing at a wedding at the door and somebody said that to me. even before they gave us any money. So dайте нам гроші перше, тоді you can ask for that. So anyways, and we heard that one. So the next group of kind of music that he made were these episodic records where he played music but also had actors that were acting parts of different kind of community celebrations. And the first one that he did was a record called Українське весілля, and reportedly this sold over like 100,000 copies of this record. That was like astronomical in those days. A record company, if you sold 500 records, they were happy, and the story is that like over 100,000 of these were sold, not only to Ukrainians. I guess there were other Eastern European communities where they could relate to the sound of this as well. So it sounds kind of like this. We'll give you a little bit of it. And it goes on and on like that. You listen to this lady's voice as well. She has this kind of scratchy sounding voice. It's a project I've wanted to do for years, and I don't know how to do it without offending anybody. She's the first of a long line of ladies with scratchy voices that made records, and I don't understand what the thing was, but there's many of them that were famous. They all sound the same like that. Why people like that scratchy voice sound, I don't know. But someday maybe we'll get to that question yet. So anyways, he made, after Українське весілля, he made all kind of other things. You see here, there's поправини, there's хрестини, there's some kind of поправини для старих, and on, a whole series of all these other records that were similar. Sometimes you had to buy 2 or 3 records to get the whole play on there. And then as soon as he did this, then other groups kind of came up with the idea, well, if he's doing that, maybe we could do it as well. So there was a whole series of similar recordings for this Lemkівське весілля. Let's see, are you going to talk to us, Mr. Lemko? No, come back. Where is he? Ah. And it goes on and on with that. I like the thing at the very beginning when he's asking, who are you, these people? Who are you people? We're from your village. What grows on your farm? Oh, everything grows, but rocks grow the best, you know? All right, and then the third kind of group of recordings that Humanyuk made, were connected with this fellow who you're familiar with from displays that this Kule Folklore Center did. This Vasilya Vermenko, and he went across North America teaching dancing all over the place. What he would usually do is find local musicians that he would teach the tunes that he wanted to people to dance to, but then figured out it's easier for me to just buy one of those record machines and some records. So they got Humanyuk to record, because Vermenko had like some stock number of dances, a dozen or 15 dances that he would teach in various different places. So Humanyuk made a number of those. So here's one of them. And you get the idea there. So, depending on which group he was recording with, that sounded a lot fancier than the earlier one, Haraibo Horoshi Bidai, where it was just like a fiddle and cymbala. And this is one of the dance schools, so there's some local musicians that got hired. Actually, these are two guys here in Alberta that they ended up playing for a lot of the of Ramenko's various kind of dancing things. It was not only Homeniuk making records in the 20s, there were all kinds of other, once he had success, there were all kind of other groups that went on and made more and more records, and there's literally hundreds, you can look through the old catalogs of the big name recording companies and see all these records made by Ukrainians. And then the reason that I kind of focus on them is because lots of those tunes from those records, what they did was, as I mentioned before, people were just playing the tunes that they knew from their own village. All of a sudden, here's some kind of standardization of all of that. Now that it's on a record, everybody says, oh, well, that guy in New York's playing that, maybe we should learn that tune. And so people started learning the songs that were on the records and playing them as often as the songs that they knew from their own villages. And that kind of went on to eventually become what most people played in Western Canada. So in the 1960s, you had another kind of trend. So we had these old village dance tunes kind of going on and on from the 20s for about 40 years. And it was kind of done in the same way. Again, we didn't have too many records made here in Western Canada until about the 1950s, I would say. And then it was only in small amounts. Like, for example, the Ukrainian bookstore that used to be downtown here recorded some of the bands from East Central Alberta. And in Winnipeg, there are a couple small companies recorded a couple of the dance bands from there. And they're mostly just playing dance music, and that's about it. All of a sudden, in the 1960s, we have these folks that show up. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with them. They're a group from Winnipeg. It's Mickey and Bunny, and what they did was they were just singing English music in the bars in Winnipeg, and a Ukrainian guy that worked in the record industry came to them and said, you know what, if you could sing some of these songs in Ukrainian, we could probably make some records of that and sell them. So they ended up making eventually like a series. I think they had 18 albums and a whole bunch of single things. And again, I mentioned that Homeniuk's record of the Ukrainian wedding sold 100,000 copies, and their recording that sounds like this. So oops, we'll take that picture again. That record reportedly sold hundreds of thousands of copies as well. First, like just the 45, like a single version, so one song on one side and another song on the other side, and they sold those. Didn't have the big record company like in New York. It was like small guy out of Winnipeg, and then also driving back and forth across the prairie, selling them out of your car and out of stores. Like they would go set up inside a store in every small town and play a little bit and then sell records there. Anyways, this idea of taking Ukrainian tunes and twisting them around caught on, and a number of other groups tried doing that. So I'm back to the 1960s, and you'll see my picture of Homeniuk again. One of the things that happened is same thing that happened in the 20s, once Mickey and Bunny had a whole bunch of success selling all these records, then everybody else thought, oh, maybe we should do the same thing. So then record companies started, about 2 or 3 in Winnipeg, a couple here in Edmonton, one in Saskatchewan, a few others in other places. And what was on these records, again, these first looking for quantity rather than quality, started recording all of the local dance bands that were playing at weddings and things like that. And one of the things that happened is they started recreating all those old tunes of Pavlo Homeniuk. one of the things these record companies did was take all his old records and just repackage them again. So you can see the colorful one that says Ukrainsky Veselya. So they took all those old 78 records and just made one album, you know, where you could hear all of those things. And then the one I like the best on the other side, Ukrainian comedy jams, because they had lots of funny songs that he recorded. But up in the right-hand corner, it says like "Всі нові," all new. So in 1960, they're all new, except they're just all new in this package. But they're the same old ones from 1929 or whatever it is, right? So here's one example. Here's Homenyuk, and the singer is a guy named Michael or Mikhailo Svistun. So they're singing the. And it goes on and on, telling the whole story about this guy going from Ternopil to go visit his girlfriend someplace. Anyways, one of the other big stars that kind of evolved in the 1960s time was a guy named Tommy Buick. He's the guy in the cowboy hat there. And he was a fiddle player, and he often had, in his band was a singer named Peter Hnatyuk, who also became like one of the big stars of this record industry of that time. Some of you may have heard of his brother Nick Hnatyuk. He lives here in Edmonton, and he used to play music here a lot as well. But Pete Hnatyuk he became like the new comedy star of Ukrainian records, and his records were like in everybody's house as well. So here's them playing the same thing. Oi, oi, oi. Hold on. There you go. And there's, you listen to Pete's way of singing, it's kind of different than the previous one already. And the more I listen to them, like there's the times when I used to listen to these when I was a kid and I couldn't understand half of what he was saying. And then later on when my Ukrainian improved, I understood that it's because he was making up words that don't exist. That's why he couldn't understand what he was saying. He couldn't hear what was on the old record, so he just filled it in with this many syllables of something or other and kept going. And okay, now I get it. So anyways, the third thing that also happened, so again, we had, in the 20s, Homenyuk had dance tunes, so we had that. We had these Ukrainian wedding things. So here's 4 different like versions of old Ukrainian country-style weddings, played by different kind of groups. And then the third thing that happened was we went back and a bunch of bands started re-recording all of these tunes from Avraменko's dance repertoire. So this is the, where are they? Nope, come back here. This thing, there we go. So it sounds a little bit different than the way Homenyuk recorded it, of course. But it reflects like what 1960s Western Canada was like. That was the D Drifters. They were the backing band for Mickey and Bunny. And then when I was a little kid and in the church basement taking Ukrainian dancing lessons, I think that particular song I heard for 3 years every day. So that's do this for like hours and hours to that particular record, and then it would get to the end and they'd have to jump the needle back. So that's them. So then we just had like all kinds of other bands making records, mostly again of the old dance tunes, but what's always interesting for me, most of these you can find upstairs, no, not upstairs, around the corner here, if you want to go look through the archives of the Medvitsky Folklore archives. And I like the way that people presented themselves. You know, the Primrose Trio there are in these tuxedos, they look like they're super fancy. They're playing the old-time dance, you know, it's fiddle and cymbala, sounds like the Homenyuk. Bill Prokopchuk, he looks like a, you know, cowboy from Nashville. He's also just playing you the same Kulameka and whatever all. You know, these guys couldn't decide what they wanted to look like. It's the same band. On one side they're in the tuxedos, and the next side they're on the tractor. You know, and in reality, like the guy standing up on the big tractor, like he's a farmer. He belongs in that picture more than he belongs in the fancy tuxedo picture. Bill Wolashin, yeah. And then here's some from Alberta with these early records that they started making here, and Dmitro Radomsky and Bill Boychuk and Joe Hrecik, Jim Watzko. And so what I wanted to say, another thing that happened is in the 60s, Mickey and Bunny, they kind of had three things that they did that kind of were part of their phenomenon. So one of the things where they had translations and adaptations, you heard that country music, so they made a bunch of records where they took like contemporary country songs and wrote Ukrainian lyrics to them. And it helped, Mickey's dad was he was a writer, like he used to write novels and books of poetry, so his Ukrainian was pretty good, so he would help them write translations that sounded better than other ones that arrived after their fact. So they made country music, they made gospel music. This is not like our Ukrainian church songs, these are like gospel songs that you and I heard. If you were listening to a country western radio station and they had a gospel show, so these kind of like, you know, Protestant American gospel tunes, they made re-recordings of that. And then they also made records of original compositions. This is one of Mickey's beer parlor songs, so there's all kind of songs about him making homebrew and doing all that kind of stuff. You can see in the picture, he's being arrested for selling drugs, which he did because besides being a musician, he was a pharmacist. So yeah, but so that was the rumor all the time. Oh, Mickey made all his money selling drugs. He said yes, because he works at a drugstore. That's how he made his money, right? And then again, that band that was playing that Kozachok for Ukrainian dancing, they did some of these adaptations. This is his D Drifters, and they made a whole record of the British invasion bands like the Beatles and Dave Clark 5 and et cetera, et cetera. So, whoops, why is it, every time I have to press a different button for you. Get the message. So, and the translation's less than stellar, you can say. Yes.
Did they ever get prosecuted for copyright violation?
No, it's funny. I did a presentation once that was all about that kind of music. No, because the Beatles lived far away in England, and these guys were playing in Ituna, Saskatchewan, or in Two Hills or whatever. And I don't think the Beatles got to Two Hills to hear them doing this. And they still sold like thousands and thousands of these records. But I think it's pre-internet days, so we didn't have that same, and there were fewer teams of lawyers on the go, I think, at that time as well. So here's some other folks that made what I call creative kind of records, like writing their own songs, and lots of them are really, really interesting. There's the Pub with No Beer record is Fred Chiterbuk. He's from Gilbert Plains, Manitoba. There's Mike Zaitz, Roy Mikitishin, and there's Walter Clyde Rutka. I ended up making one of his songs. He has a famous song about going to Hawaii. So it's him, like this farmer that sells a bunch of steers and gets enough money to go to Hawaii, and what his adventures are there. But it's all in Ukrainian, or in the Ukrainian that you can sing in Swan River, Manitoba, where Clyde was from. So the next kind of big change that happened was in the 1980s, and that's was precipitated by these folks here. This is the band from Toronto called Buria. The guy sitting on the chair with the accordion is Ron Cahoot, recently deceased Ron Cahoot. He just passed away this summer. And what Ron did, his father was from rural Manitoba, and I guess when they moved to Ontario, his dad took a box of those old records that I've just been showing you there, and Ron was listening to those. And what he did was take the prairie tunes that were on these old records, including songs by Mickey and Bunny and all these other groups, and kind of repackaged it with, you can see this band here, it's got a bunch of saxophones and clarinet and all this kind of thing. So polka music, mainstream polka music is kind of from the Midwest of the United States, from Cleveland and Chicago and those places. And it's a different style than our Ukrainian Western Canada music. And he kind of fused those two things together. So it was kind of a louder, punchier kind of version of polka music, but the core material was the old tunes from Western Canada. So he appealed to urban audiences in Ontario, where he was based, but also people in Western Canada said, here's like the tunes we know, but it sounds really different. And so here's just a sample for you. You know. Yeah. Oh yeah, that thing. Good. So you get the message. So you can hear it's different sounding than what the prairie music was like. So what Ron did was, and I guess to his credit, come up with a new way of doing things. One of the things I was kind of disappointed is, and it's just because of the nature of the packaging, there's limited information on the package from his record, so it just tells you the names of the songs. And for many years, everybody thought, here's the genius Ron Cahoot who came up with really cool songs. And what they didn't realize is some of them came from other places. So we're back to my friend Fred Chatterbook here from Thing. And Fred wrote this song in the 1960s. It sounds like this. So you can hear it's the old style sounding music. Fred's singing in this kind of macaronic language where he has some English words and some Ukrainian words. What he talks about is driving to Yorkton, which is something he probably did because he lived in Gilbert Plains. It's like an hour away from Yorkton. So Ron made his own version of this. And so you get the idea. It sounds much fancier, and Ron sold way more records than Fred Chatterbook ever sold in his life. Get back to your question about copyright. It never says anywhere that this is written by Fred Chatterbook, so in the way that modern music industry works, Fred could have made a lot of money off those records, but he never did, I guess. And the point is, this sounded like exciting, fancy, and people caught on to that style. And so then bands in Western Canada, all of a sudden, instead of copying the previous generations of Western Canada bands, started copying the Toronto way of playing all these songs. So you have our friend, the guy with the cymbala there is Stephen Schwach, that you probably hear on the radio all the time. And this is his band from the early 1980s. And you've heard the tune, so I'm not going to play it over and over again for you. This, in the 1990s, a band from the Vegreville area called Trubka, they made their version of it. And on they go. And then in the early 2000s, this band Tuti Tam from Saskatoon, they made their own version too. Younger guys playing a bit faster, right? Yeah. And you get the message. So I'm not going to go on with that. We could listen to all the various versions of it over and over again. One of the things I say is we have lots of recycling of our music. So we recycled all of Hominiuk's music. We recycled all those Mickey and Bunny and all the 1960s things. These bands keep recycling Ron Cahoot over and over again. And that continues to today. If you go to some kind of a dance, even in Edmonton today, I'm sure you'll hear lots of versions of songs of Ron Cahoot over and over again. The way that Ron played them, and many bands play them kind of almost the same way. So now I'm gonna make a little shift to talking about my own particular music here, and there'll be plenty of recycling there. So this is a picture from one of our more popular recordings, and I started this band, Kubasonics, back in 1996, and the way it started was kind of the same way that I ended up here today. It is somebody invited me to come and bring a bunch of weird instruments to a concert. I think it was actually Jason, who's in the back of the room there. He invited me to come to a dance concert, and they needed time for dancers to change their costumes. So he said, can you play some weird instruments while they have to change from this to that? And at the time, they were paying me nothing anyways. So I said, would you mind if I bring 4 more people with me? Go ahead, what the heck? And so we played the first time. We only had like 5 or 6 tunes that we were playing. Now, I thought it was just a one-off thing, but what I had in my mind at the time was I had just come from a concert of this band called Rollins Cross. They were playing here in Edmonton. Actually played in, I think, Spruce Grove or something. Rollins Cross was at the time in the early 1990s, there was a big fad for Celtic music in Canada, and so all kind of bands from Eastern Canada that played Celtic music and started kind of rearranging it, making versions that sound more like rock music or upbeat folk music. Were played on the radio right across Canada. They were on television at the time and stuff. And so I went to see this show of Rollins Cross. You can see the guy playing bagpipes. There's a guy playing the accordion. And I got all excited about this music, and I thought I could do the same thing with Ukrainian music. Let's take it like a different direction than what Ron Cahoot did, like not all polka. We could mix it with other genres of music. And just by coincidence, my brother was living at my house for the summer because he was working at the Ukrainian village. And my brother was a drummer in a bunch of funk music bands in Winnipeg, and so we started playing around. Like I would play a tune on the cymbala and he'd play some kind of weird drum pattern, and the first few songs that we played evolved out of that. Just for an interesting side note, this Rollins Cross that you see here, the guy on the far right playing the guitar, I play in a band with him now in Newfoundland. So I often tell him, like, it's because of you that I'm doing half of the stuff that we're doing. I play in more than one band in Newfoundland, by the way. So anyways, one of the things that I wanted to do is have kind of 3 different things that when I first started this. One was to recreate traditional material, so to make some songs sound, kind of play them the same way that they sounded on old-time records, basically. And I call this direct recycling. So I was just directly recycling what had happened before. The second thing was to adapt take that traditional material, but twist it around in a different way. So I'll say this indirect recycling. And the third thing was create original material, kind of like on those original records when you saw Mickey making beer parlor songs, or Mike Zayats, or Walter Rutka talking about going to Hawaii, that sort of stuff. So one of the reasons I wanted to recreate old tunes was a way to draw in the audiences that were accustomed to familiar things. People like to hear stuff that they already know. So I figured, well, I better play some stuff they already know or already kind of know anyways. Or it was a way to maybe play some of the tunes that they may have forgotten about. So I wanted to play some of those old Paul Hominiuk songs that weren't played anymore because Ron Cahoot sort of displaced them a little bit. So here's one of them. I don't know, I showed Stephen Chwak's a picture there before. Prior to Stephen Chwak, or a couple of radio host prior to him. There was Dan Chomlak, who was the host of the Ukrainian Hour when it was still coming from Camrose. And his theme music was this song called The Early Bird of Spring. And the music they played, it was a recording by Al Cherney, who used to be on Tommy Hunter show on the radio. So it sounds like this. This is about the time when he'd say, "Hi, I'm Dan Chomlak, and you're listening to the Ukrainian Hour on CFCW." Yes. So you got the idea. So what we did was try and make it sound the same or similar. And you get it. So that's my good friend Rod Olstead here doing his best Al Cherney imitation on that tune. But Rod played the fiddle on those recordings. So the second part thing was to adapt these old time tunes. One of the reasons to do that would be attract new audiences. So people who wouldn't want to go listen to old time Ukrainian music might come to listen to some band playing weird music that was based on Ukrainian music. And then another way was to kind of show those people, if they showed up to the concert, that Ukrainian music actually is comprised of a whole bunch of other things that they may not have been familiar with. I guess one of the things I forgot to say as well is one more motivation here was I would make up songs as a way to feature some weird instrument that I had collected somewhere or other. So lots of them have those kind of things. So here's our band from East Central Alberta. The guy with the fiddle is Bill Boychuk. This is a band called the Easy Aces, and the guy playing that cymbala is John Blugush, and standing next to him is Dan Chomlak, the host of the radio. If you look really closely, the radio station's call letters are on that microphone there. So here's their tune. It's Hutzulka. This was a popular dance in Ukraine and still is in Ukraine, and was popular in East Central Alberta for many years. It sounds. This is off an old scratchy '78 record of theirs. And it goes on and on. There's many parts to this. I can't play the whole thing. So we made a similar record to that on our first recording called Miaso, and it sounded like this. So this trembita, because it was Hutzolka, so I put a trembita. These are guys that I recorded on one of my field trips in the Carpathian Mountains in Ukraine. They were going to play at some funeral, and they played the thing for me on the trembita, and then and it's the same tune, so basically we followed exactly the way it was played on Bill Boychuk's record, just that twisted around in a different fashion there. I'll jump through a few of these. If you want, you can go around the corner to the Folklore archives and listen to these more in depth. So and then so that's the adaptation. The third thing was make original songs, and this was a way to draw in audiences that I thought were alienated by mainstream Ukrainian culture, who I had in mind were my own cousins. So my cousins live on the same homestead that my great-grandparents settled on in the eastern part of Saskatchewan. They're all farmers. They speak with a pretty thick Ukrainian accent. None of them can speak a word of Ukrainian. They're not familiar with like Ukrainian politics because they're all born in Saskatchewan. So basically they don't follow the pattern of anything that you would accept a Ukrainian Canadian to be, except if you ask them, what are you? We're Ukrainian. And they believe that they're Ukrainian because they are. And so it's a good question for like when community groups are doing these things, who is a Ukrainian? It's many things. Whether you speak the language or whether it's inside you, I guess those are the things that really matter. So I started thinking, how can I make music that these guys would enjoy? And what do they know? Like they know about different things. So I started making stupid songs, one about all the giant monuments that you see all across the prairies here. And I tried to include in Saskatchewan that big lady there is like a few miles from their farm. And Comarno, Manitoba is from a few miles from where my other great-grandparents' farm was in Manitoba. You know, I made songs about hockey superstar Billy Mosienko. He was from Winnipeg. He was one of my neighbors when I lived in Winnipeg. He still holds the NHL record for the fastest 3 goals ever. He scored 3 goals in 21 seconds. And so I made a song about him. It actually was played on Hockey Night in Canada when it was the 50th anniversary of him scoring that 3 goals in 21 seconds. I made stupid songs about imaginary butchers on the prairies, you know, making kubasa of that song. I made a song about Nick's Kubasa. But what happens if we say the words Nick's Kubasa many times in a row, it ends up being Nick's Kubasa, Nick's Kubasa, Nick's, and in the end you hear the name of our band in there as well. I had a friend in Saskatchewan, he phoned me once, it was like 2 years after we made that record, he said, I was playing your thing in the car and I finally heard the joke. He said, it took me 2 years, but I got it. And so I also made a stupid song. This is my Baba. And so one of our family kind of stories, my Baba used to like to smoke, but she tried to hide it from all of us. Like, so we would come to her place and there'd be air freshener smell because she was hiding the fact that she smoked. But this was in the 1990s yet, so I made a thing. I took stuff that people understood about making holubtsi, but I kind of implied that my Baba was like rolling something other than holubtsi in her house, and that smoke was something other than her cooking. So it sounded kind of like this. You get the message. Actually my sister had a genius idea. When we made that record, she said, well, these songs will probably be listened to by people who don't understand Ukrainian, so we had to put a glossary in the liner notes. We put words, what's holubtsi, cabbage roll, you know, because it says, like one of the verses, every verse has some kind of reference to cannabis products, you know, which at the time were illegal. And you know, one said that like my Baba's apartment was full of smoke, but it was not Cadelo, you know, it's something else, you know. And so, anyways, now I'm going to transition because Larissa wanted me to talk about how this changed when I moved to Newfoundland. We kind of bill ourselves as arguably Newfoundland's finest Ukrainian band. The reality is there are no other Ukrainian bands in Newfoundland. When I first moved there, people were asking me, is there lots of Ukrainians in Newfoundland? And I said, yes, they all live in my house. With the unfortunate circumstances of the war, that's changed now. So we've had almost 3,000 new Ukrainians move to Newfoundland in the last year and a half. And we started a Ukrainian Cultural Association there now. We've had a number of events. We're doing all kinds of other stuff, which is very interesting. It's nice to have some other people to deal with. But Newfoundlanders, we've been playing there since now 2015. So we started playing our music again then. And some of my Newfoundland friends said, oh, you'll have a great, you know, these new Ukrainians will want to listen to your music. I'm going, probably not, because many of them coming from contemporary Ukraine. So again, this recycling that we've been doing in Canada for 120 years now, they're not familiar with that. So most of them probably listen to Taylor Swift or Drake or something else like that, you know, as opposed to, they don't want to hear old dance tunes from Ternopil province of Ukraine or whatever. So anyways, we have plenty of recycling in our music. We play some of the tunes of Paul Hominiuk. We play some tunes of Mickey and Bunny and of their band, the D-Drifters, and some other kind of Western Canadian stuff. Again, kind of repackaged most of the time. We also play some songs that are based on the old repertoire from Kubzari. So I've made like rearrangements of some of those kind of things. From old, you know, mid-century bands like the Trio Moranich from Ukraine, some more contemporary bands from Ukraine. There's my friends, the Kozak System. I played in a bunch of concerts with them over the years. And even recycling some of materials from Robert Klimash's field work from the 1960s, where he took different tunes or collected songs from people all across the prairies, and we reworked a number of those as well. So I kind of came up with a couple of things that are different from what I did on the prairies. One of them is that all of those songs that were basically Western Canadian based, or those things like my Baba making Holubtsi, my Newfoundland colleagues said, these are cool songs, they're interesting, but nobody in Newfoundland knows about what Holubtsi are, or nobody knows about those giant monuments that are on the highway in Alberta. So, but these Ukrainian songs that are more from Ukraine, that sounds more interesting to us. Let's just pick the more musically challenging kind of stuff and work with that. So one of the things we did was we tried to combine Ukrainian traditional music with Newfoundland traditional music. And at first what we did was try and find something of ours and something from Newfoundland and kind of play them back to back. So I'll give you a short example of that. Wait, I'm going to pause myself for a second and I'm going to back up. So what I'm playing here first, it's a series of hayivke, so they're spring dance tunes from Ukraine, and I'm playing it on that Ukrainian style bagpipe. The first time I heard a Ukrainian bagpipe was on a recording by the Khorveryovka from Ukraine, and they had an arrangement of these spring dance tunes. So we kind of took that and changed it a little bit, and the songs are all about taking the goats to pasture. So the boys are taking the goats to pasture and the girls come and visit them, and then they're doing this krevet tanets, this crooked dance and stuff like that. And in Newfoundland, they have a series of folk dance tunes for a specific set dance called Running the Goat. So it's kind of like square dancing, but a caller tells you what kind of moves you have to do, and you do that. So we took our Ukrainian goat music, and then we put it together with Newfoundland's Running the Goat. Again, I took this video clip, I cut and pasted it, so you won't hear the whole thing of any of those things. I think he's going to switch to the goat music right away, Newfoundland music, I should say. Unfortunately, I can't control that here. Oh, I can. Look at that. Let's jump ahead. Here we go. Here's this. Anyways, you get the message, and it goes on and on like that. And so we also had some new recycling. I'm going to go fast because I've been talking for too long here, sorry. We've taken some of Hominiuk's music again. So here's one of his tunes that was, it's called the Zachipeusia Kobosою. which, considering the name of my band, I thought it was an appropriate song. And he tells this whole story about him going to this wedding where he tries to steal Kubasa out of the pantry where they're getting the food ready. Here's our friend Pete Natyuk again with his 12 Goofy hits. The first time I heard this song was from Pete Natyuk on this record of Tommy Buick's. Oops. Oh, sorry. Let's go back there. There he is. I forgot he's... And it goes on with the same story. So we made our own version. It sounds kind of a little bit different though.
Як залізе до комори, як злодій до каси, та й понюхав солонину і смачні ковбаси. А я хлопець народний, я сала не чіпаю, а на ті ковбаси дуже мило споглядаю. Як зачав я ті ковбаси у кишені пхати, стала мені думка рести, як то утікати.
It's fun listening to a whole room of Newfoundlanders singing Kubasa, Kubasa. All right, and the last thing I want to show you, and I'll cut this one short too, it's kind of an integrated hybrid. So over the number of years now, since we've been there longer in Newfoundland, what we've tried doing now is making songs that combine Ukrainian and Newfoundland music all in the same piece. So this example, I took a Ukrainian folk song about Ethnomusicology and the girls picking cranberries. We mixed it with a fiddle tune that's popular in Newfoundland called The Star of Munster, and another one called The Breakwater Boys Breakdown that was written by one of the most famous fiddlers in all of Newfoundland. His name's Emile Benoit. So we got like famous fiddlers, Paul Hominiuk, famous fiddlers, Emile Benoit. We put them all together in the same thing, and so it's kind of come out like this. So here's one of those Newfoundland tunes, and it goes on and on like that throughout the whole piece. You also may have noticed I was wearing a kind of a strange-looking Ukrainian shirt. So what I tried to do was mix like the embroidery of Ukraine and these kind of Western Canadian like cowboy-style shirt. It took me the longest time. I play in a one-country band in Newfoundland as well, so I have lots of those cowboy-style shirts that I bought, in various places. And I was trying to explain to people in Ukraine, okay, I want a shirt, it looks like this. I gave them pictures, I showed them drawings of it, whatever, and I couldn't convince anybody to, and I picked out an embroidery pattern that's from kind of the area where my family's from in Ukraine. And nobody in Ukraine could understand and finally my wife said, give me your shirt, I'll do it for you. So she actually made that shirt for me. So anyways, so this comes to the end of the thing. I hope it's not too much information, but you can see, like, we've repackaged stuff. Like, people in Western Canada have been repackaging for years and years. I started repackaging things in a number of different ways. We've had, especially since coming to Newfoundland, my wife came up with a great phrase. So she said, when we lived in Alberta, you were a Ukrainian musician. And in Newfoundland, you're a musician who plays Ukrainian music. And it's kind of a completely different idea. And Newfoundlanders, not only Newfoundlanders, but people all across Canada have kind of taken to this thing. We've fortunately won a number of different kind of awards from the music industry in Newfoundland, from the East Coast music industry. Our last record was nominated for one Juno Award for all of Canada, and we've played in Europe, in the Caribbean. One of the songs on our record, on our last record, we kind of made it during the COVID times, so there's some, what do you call it, collaborations with, we traveled to Trinidad to play in a festival there, and we played with musicians from Trinidad, so we recorded music together with them. We recorded some music with our friends in Ukraine that we've played with at various times, so we've gotten to do a lot of interesting things, and hopefully we'll continue doing that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad.